Good morning, Bill.
Morning.
Steve, I can't hear you at all. Is your audio on?
I was talking to Bob about a situation I'm having. My internet is unstable at the moment, so I may be coming in and out. We'll see.
Okay.
There's Dave Katz.
Hello.
Hi, Dave.
Oh, hey, when I clicked on the link, it said meeting ID invalid.
Huh.
Meeting ID 819-9577-8221.
When I put that in, it worked, but when I just clicked on the link, it didn't work.
So I just used the meeting ID and the passcode.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I did too.
Link.
That's what I did as well.
So I wonder if there's a problem with the link. I wonder when we can send out another email telling people to just plug in the passcode and the code and the password instead of clicking on the link. Whoops.
Well, I got right in clicking the link and using the Israel one.
How come my video is not working? There's no video. For some reason, my video is not working. That's weird.
Hi, Bill.
Hello, Bill.
I
Apparently people are having issues getting to the link.
Yeah, the link.
Yeah.
well, Bill.
There's Dave.
There.
Yeah, the link is not working. You have to enter the ID and the passcode in order to
Yeah.
Yeah.
connect.
That's what I did, and it
I
worked.
don't bother with the link ever. I just use the ID and password.
While we're waiting here, we're on next door up here in Prescott. And yesterday, somebody posted a picture about.
Hello.
Go ahead, Bill.
Somebody posted a picture of himself sitting on his porch with his feet underneath the javelina. And the guy said he loved the javelina belly rubs. I hope he had his insurance paid. Do you hear an echo?
Yes.
Yes.
What do I do about that?
Echo.
He has a phone on.
You have a phone on?
No.
It started when Bill came on.
Bill, would you mute your phone a minute or mute your computer shortly?
Well, let's see if now it's not echoing.
No, it's not.
Okay.
We need to send a message out to everybody because that was Jan Sonos. Andre, the link is not working.
It should be. The link is as the program follows. So
The passcode and the code and the password work, but the link is not working.
well, then, I mean, it's nothing. I was able to make it in, so it should be an issue with how it was sent out via email.
I just got a call from Jan Soto. She couldn't get in either.
So look, if the password and the meeting code work, then people
Here, Norman.
meeting either one works.
Well, I know, but people.
I don't know what I can do from my end because all I did was schedule it and create the link. So
Yeah.
I don't know what I can do.
Get this thing to move.
Somebody probably sent it to me.
Well, I can.
I did see an email that went out from the office earlier this week or later.
Only 7 people on there now.
So there could be an issue with how it was transmitted via that email.
Right.
Yeah, Ross did that one.
So
Is it not possible to just resend something to people?
Well, I don't even have the list of who was signed up for it.
let me see what I can find. I mean, give me 2 seconds.
Okay.
I really don't have a lot of time this morning, but
Yeah, I hate to have people excluded.
It's a scan, so you're not gonna get, you have, had to write it down and then.
I'm in the website, I'm in the Zoom thing,
Other than a real link.
but there's a problem at their end, he's saying. So you got Andre talking to some of the people that are on. Oh.
There's Jan.
Hi, Jan.
Oh, there's Howard.
Hey, Harvey.
I do.
You can see one ear.
What'd you have? Oh, yeah.
Harvey, all we can see of you is one ear.
Huh?
All we can see of you is one ear.
I'll move over.
What you have to put in the passcode, cut and paste
I can't find my.
passcode, and then it'll just follow the prompts and it'll ask for the password. And then the password is Israel 1. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, it's in the letter there. So instead of using the link. Oh, I'll send it to you. No, that's right. You didn't call, so you didn't get the letter. Okay. Yeah, will do. Okay. All righty. Bye-bye.
Dave or anyone or Steve, if anyone needs the link is now accessible via the temple calendar on the website. They can go to the temple calendar, go to the, on the website and find
the ID.
now accessible.
Okay.
And then put in the passcode when prompted, and it's
People wouldn't know to do that though.
under the link in the letter. Go to zoom.com, and then on the top it says join a meeting.
We have, according to the list, we're only missing
Under the
2
link.
people from the list. So,
Okay.
How many was that, Andre?
That'll do it.
we're only missing 2 people who are signed up. So I would say let's begin. People will come in. What I'm going to do is put up the, I'm going to prompt it so that it mutes people when they come in. So therefore, they're not disrupting anything. So I would say let us begin.
Okay.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, I'm gonna get my screen share up now.
Hi, Dana. We're all having trouble this morning. What you need to do is copy and paste the meeting ID.
All right, we ready?
Howard, are you ready?
Yep.
Question, will this be recorded so that
Yes,
people?
It's being
it is
recorded.
being recorded. Yes, it is being recorded.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Bill Weiss. I'm very glad to be with you this morning. I wish I could be there in person because Bill had invited me twice before and I had a good time with your congregation. Now, before I start, being that these are politically charged times, just let me say that there is some politics involved here. I am a registered independent and a small p pragmatist. I like to consider people and issues without running them through any ideological or partisan positions. So please keep that in mind as we go on. Now, the title of this talk is Israel and its Religious Right Wing. Many, if not most, of the Zionists and the founders of the state of Israel were atheists or agnostics. A question immediately presents itself. How do atheists and agnostics found a Jewish state? The answer is that the Jewish state they envisioned was not a religious state per se, but a largely secular state with a multicultural population. Israel, they always envisioned Israel as multicultural and multi-religious, but with a large Jewish majority. And as you probably know, about 21% of Israel's citizens today are not Jewish. Now, the motivation here was to conquer anti-Semitism and be proud. All of these people had experienced anti-Semitism in their day, and some had narrowly been missed being wiped out in one of the pogroms that struck Jewish communities in Eastern Europe every few years. They knew that when the murderers struck, they didn't subject their victims to a test of piety or observance. They killed indiscriminately, even Gentiles who were among them. Only in a sovereign Jewish state with a large Jewish majority, they reckoned, could Jews be free of anti-Semitism, form their own self-defense forces, and be at liberty to practice Judaism as they saw fit, or not to practice Judaism if they saw fit. The path toward Zionism did not proceed in a straight line. On the one hand were the ultra-Orthodox who believed that Israel could only be founded and formed by the Messiah, and that any attempt to build a Jewish state before that, particularly a secular Jewish state, was blasphemous or worse. On the other side of the coin were the assimilationists. By the end of the latter part of the 19th century, most Western and Central European countries had emancipated their Jewish populations, and Jews had begun to enjoy a measure of assimilation and integration into society. This new Jewish bourgeoisie believed that assimilation, not nationalism, was the way to go. Some of them even averred that the problems Jews experienced, that terrible persecution, was their own fault because they refused to integrate into society, as if they had the choice. It's the equivalent of blaming the victim for the crime. But these new Jewish bourgeoisie, the assimilationists, were aided in part by the Reform Jewish movement, which was formed in Germany in the early part of the 19th century. Hello, let's see if I can get my, oh, I can't move my presentation. 1 second here, please. I'm going to try again. I regret. Let me try again. Okay, can people see that now?
Yep.
Okay, so, all right, I guess the full screen didn't work, but we'll try this. Fine, good. Okay, within the Reformed Jewish movement, Rabbi Abraham Geiger said Jews are a religious community destined to be a light unto the nations. The diaspora was not a punishment by God, but part of God's plan to disseminate Jewish values throughout the world. Jews need to give up their ethnic and national identities. That was clearly what the Reformed Jewish movement meant at the time. They saw that Judaism not as a people or a nation or a race, but as a movement designed to spread enlightenment in the world. In America, Rabbi Isaac Meyer Wise said, we consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community. You can read the rest, but basically to the quote, next year in Jerusalem, he said, it is about as well to let the old Jerusalem rest under a accretion of ages as is described in the Bible in Josephus. So that was the thinking of the assimilationists. Well, they got a rude awakening, didn't they? They got a rude awakening in 1894 when Captain Alfred Dreyfus was accused and convicted of, in the French army, he was on the French general staff, of selling military secrets to the Germans. This occasioned a wild outburst of anti-Semitism within France, and it shocked the assimilationists. How could this happen? In France, of all countries, the land of liberté, égalité, fraternité, the first nation in Europe to emancipate its Jewish population. So when the World Zionist Organization had its first conference in Basel, Switzerland in 1897, there you see that in the center picture, I'm going to use my pointer here, they were listening. The World Zionist Organization was decidedly secular, and they passed 4 resolutions. I call these out because if you take a look at the resolutions here at the bottom, not one of them mentions God, nor building synagogues, nor the Torah, nor any scripture, nor anything religious. The one I called out, number 3, the strengthening of the Jewish feeling and consciousness. There you have, in a nutshell, the feeling of the assimilationists and the Zionists about their Judaism. They want to feel Jewish. They're conscious of being Jewish, but there's no religious Judaism in that particular expression, a perfect expression of how they felt about their Jewishness. The World Zionist Organization was founded by Theodor Herzl, whom you see up there at the top. You can infer from his picture, he was a very charismatic guy. Herzl was born in in Hungary, but spent most of his life in Vienna. There he worked as a journalist and experienced firsthand the anti-Semitism that ran right through this most cosmopolitan and gayest of European capitals. He expressed his view of the Jewish state in militant terms. I will give you the definition of a nation, and you can add the adjective Jewish. A nation is an historical group of men of a recognized cohesion held together by a common enemy. Then if you add the word Jewish, you have the understanding of the Jewish nation. Again, no mention of God, of synagogues, of the Torah, of building religious Judaism. No. Herzl worked tirelessly lobbying the crowned heads of Europe and the prime ministers to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine, which was then under the purview of the Ottoman Turks. He didn't succeed, but he did get the Turks to agree that the World Zionist Organization could buy land for settlement purposes in Palestine, which was then under their purview. The city of Tel Aviv today, which is the largest and the most vibrant of Israel's cities, was a pile, not much more than a pile of sand dunes in 1900. Herzl died in 1903. before he could realize his dream. His place was taken by this man, Chaim Weizmann. Very interesting fellow, Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann, born in a shtetl in Pinsk, Russia. His father was the town lumberman, and like a Jewish Huck Finn, he built a raft, floated downriver, and ended up in Germany, where he earned a PhD in chemistry. He then emigrated from Germany to England, where he was appointed lecturer in chemistry at Manchester, a tremendous honor for a foreign-born person and a Jew. He is also the founder of, he was the instigator of the Balfour Declaration in World War I, in which His Majesty's government looked with favor upon the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Here's his definition of Zionism. Zionism was conceived by its pioneers as a movement wholly depending on mechanical factors. There is a country which happens to be called Palestine without people, and on the other hand, there exists a Jewish people and it has no country. What else is necessary then than to fit the gem into the ring to unite the people of this country? Again, no mention of God, no mention of synagogues, no mention of the Torah or any scripture. Strictly a secular definition. Now, let me just get my cursor working here. You're all getting a view of my balding head. Okay. The Zionists were well educated in secular literature and other matters. They called themselves the Haskalah, the enlightened ones, but they also knew that most of the recruits to the Yeshuv, as the Jewish area of Palestine was known in that day, and later to the state of Israel, would be unenlightened Jews from Eastern Europe. Those Jews were viciously segregated, persecuted, never permitted to be citizens, never permitted to own land, never allowed to attend secular schools if there were secular schools. And they, there you see our shtetl Jews. They spent their days, you'll just have to bear with me pointing here. They spent their days plying the trades and professions that sustained their little shtetls and their nights in prayer and study. In the hothouse, closed in, isolated, insulated world of Eastern European Jewry, these people were quite apart from everybody else. As we all know, rabbis have no special powers in Judaism, but in that closed environment, those Orthodox rabbis had tremendous cultural and secular power within their communities. The rabbi was not just the go-to guy for doctrinal matters. He was also your advisor about who to marry, where to emigrate to, etc. The Zionists regarded them as antediluvian forces and wished to limit their power in the Yeshuv and later into the state of Israel. And so they took several measures, but I'm going to mention just two. One of them was the definition of who is a Jew. And the Israel's Law of Return says a Jew is a person who was born of a Jewish mother or who converted to Judaism. Period, close quote, no further definition. Here, the atheists and the agnostics were on very strong biblical grounds. As we know, the Torah relates in the book of Genesis that the matriarch Sarah, wife of patriarch Abraham, was barren. And so at Sarah's urging, Abraham begat a son, Ishmael, with Sarah's servant Hagar. But after Abraham was circumcised and made his covenant with God, Sarah miraculously became pregnant at the age of 80 and bore him a true son, Isaac. Soon thereafter, Hagar and Ishmael were banished from Abraham's camp. Matriarchal descent has been the figure of merit for Jewishness ever since, and not even the wildest-eyed rabbi would ever consider barging in on that one. Why? Because it's in the Torah. Another, here you see my pointer, was the Zionist decreed that Hebrew, not Yiddish, would be the official language of the Yeshuv and later to the state of Israel. They loathed Yiddish. As you know, Yiddish is a hybrid language. It is written with the Hebrew alphabet and read from right to left, as is Hebrew, but most of its grammar and vocabulary are Middle German. They said that Yiddish was the very symbol of a people too weak and scattered to have their own language. Hebrew, the language of the ancient and mighty kingdom of Israel, would be the language of the new state of Israel. But they had a not very sub rosa agenda here, folks. In Eastern Europe, the Orthodox rabbis, and they were all Orthodox rabbis, had stated that since the Jews were selected by God to receive God's Torah, and since God wrote the Torah, and since the Torah was in Hebrew, Hebrew was God's language. To use a Hebrew for anything other than prayer and study would be blasphemous. By requiring the use of Hebrew as a vernacular language in the state of Israel, they were in effect telling the new Jews whom they wanted to form to put aside such antediluvian and backward thinking. Oh, and also there was a little snobbery involved here. As some of you know, Yiddish is a very, because it had to serve a broad population across Europe, Yiddish is a very idiomatic and imprecise language and figurative. It's a wonderful language for literature, but it is really too imprecise for science and technology. The atheists and agnostics worshiped science and technology. Their favorite languages were German and French. Now we're going to move on here, I believe. Let's see. Okay, we move now on to politics. Israel's government is a European-style parliamentary democracy. Its legislature, the Knesset, is modeled on the British House of Commons. That is the party that, or coalition, that has a majority in the Knesset, that is at least 61 of 120 seats, gets to form a government and to have its prime minister appointed as the head of state, head of government. But there's a difference. Whereas Britain only has 2 major and 1 minor parties, Israel has more than 24 active political parties, and at least a dozen of those parties elect members of Knesset in twos, sometimes in 2s and 3s. That's why every Israeli government, since the founding of the state of Israel, has been a coalition. For almost the first 30 years of Israel's existence, a left of center labor coalition consisting of the Mapai and Mapam parties governed Israel. Their majority as the coalition was strong enough that they did not have to make many concessions to the right, particularly to the religious right. Now, labor's high point probably came after the 1967 war. And in the heady afterglow of that war, the government and probably a majority of the Israelis believed that the Arabs had learned their lesson. They weren't going to throw the Jews into the sea as they had been vowing to do since 1948. And so they believed they would come to the bargaining table sooner rather than later, seeking peace. For that reason, the government policy was not to allow settlement in the occupied territories occupied after the war or during the war, and instead to patrol them with the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF. And there were 2 strategic reasons for that. One was to deny Arab sappers the launching grounds for attacks on Israel that had resulted in dozens and dozens of Israeli casualties. The other was land for peace. Since they expected the Arabs to come to the bargaining table sooner rather than later, seeking peace, they did not want to be in a position to have to use Jewish troops and police to remove Jewish settlers from what they saw was a temporary possession of that land. No large-scale settlements. But even as these rose-colored glasses were pervading the Jewish population in Israel, other forces were forming on the horizon. One, here's my cursor again. One was the widespread growth of fundamentalist, charismatic, and orthodox forms of religion all around the world, I am guessing in reaction to the perceived excesses of the 60s. Although the world's attention was focused on born-again Christianity and militant Islam, but Judaism came in for its share. In Israel, a small but growing number of native Israelis, and especially immigrants from the West, clung to those ultra-Orthodox ways. They call themselves the Haredim, literally those who tremble. Tremble at what? Tremble at the word of God. The Haredim lived as close as possible to biblical precepts. They gathered among themselves in the Mea Shearim district of Jerusalem, and also especially on the land. They had no use for the government's socialistic policies. They also called the West Bank by its biblical name, Judea and Samaria, and vowed that those lands were those promised by God to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their successors, and would never be given back to the Arabs under any circumstances. A second force here, see where my cursor is, was the Sephardim, Jews who originated in the Middle East and North Africa, nearly all of whom were driven out of their countries after the 48, 56, and 67 wars. The Sephardim constituted a slight majority of Israeli Jews before the Jackson-Vanik Act of 1974 brought a large number of Jews from the former Soviet Union to Israel. These Sephardim, often darker skinned and less well educated than the Ashkenazim, the European Jews who dominated the labor coalition, they regarded themselves as being second-class citizens, shortchanged by the government in such government largesse as housing and jobs. And with recent experience of brutality at the hands of Arab governments, they were a lot less optimistic than the laborites about the chances for land for peace. A third force was Arab nationalism combined with anti-Semitism. Rather than come to the table looking for peace, the Arabs ratcheted up the apocalyptic rhetoric and behavior. Here, the Israelis had failed to reckon with a characteristic of Arabs, which is they regard simple survival in a war as a victory. And even after Operation Desert Storm had decimated Iraq, Saddam Hussein believed that he was the victor because he survived, and so did his people. Combined with that Arab rhetoric was a worldwide outburst of official anti-Semitism. Let's face it, anti-Semitism is a curse on humanity for millennia. After World War II, many governments were able to hold official anti-Semitism in check because the awful revelations of the Holocaust and their role in it made it politically incorrect to be Jew baiting. But now they were faced with a situation they didn't want to face, a new one. Jew as victor instead of victim, Jew as occupier instead of occupied, Jews as militarily strong and secure in their own country versus helpless minority in theirs. Led by the Soviet Union, dozens of nations around the world broke off relations with Israel and denounced it. Moreover, the Soviet Union began arming its principal allies in the Middle East, namely Egypt and Syria, with state-of-the-art anti-aircraft missiles. Here you see them, SAM-2 and SAM-3, as well as rocket-propelled grenades. All of this came to a head in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Let's see if I can bring that up. And there, as you remember, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, Egypt and Syria launched a coordinated attack on Israel from the west and the east, respectively. They caught the IDF completely by surprise. The IDF had only 80 tanks patrolling the whole length of the Suez Canal and the Sinai Peninsula, and IDF fell back. It was looking very bad for Israel in the first week to 10 days. The Egyptian army crossed the Suez Canal and drove 10 miles into the Sinai Peninsula. In the east, the Syrian tanks entered the occupied Golan Heights and inflicted terrible casualties on Israel. it was looking very bad until the Americans agreed to resupply some of Israel's losses from NATO stocks in Germany. And while some historians believe that Israel had already begun to turn the tide before the first significant arrivals of American equipment, there can be no doubt whatsoever that the Nixon administration secured Israel in her hour of need. All the more remarkable because, as we know, Nixon was a dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semite. In some ways, the Israeli territorial gains in the 73 war were greater than the 67. The Israeli troops surrounded the city of Port Said at the head of the Suez Canal and came within the suburbs of Damascus before being ordered out as part of a UN ceasefire. But the cost had been terrible. More than twice the casualties in the 67 war. Israel lost more than half of its tanks to Soviet provided rocket-propelled grenades. They lost a lot of aircraft to Soviet SAM-2 and SAM-3 missiles, and the rest of the Israeli Air Force was bottled up by this effective defense. A commission of inquiry appointed after the ceasefire reported 3 months later, there we see, they blamed the IDF for ignoring signs, intelligence that could have either prevented the war or mitigated some of the losses, and called for the sacking of 3 high-ranking generals. The government of Golda Meir, with Moshe Dayan here, you see him as the defense secretary, resigned. An interim government, labor government, took power, but in the general election of 1977, was it? Yes, 1977. For the first time, the Likud, or conservative party, took office, bringing to the fore Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin, very interesting fellow. Born in 1912 in Poland, he was, as a youngster, a leader of Betar, the youth auxiliary of the right-wing revision Zionist organization headed by his hero, Zeev Jabotinsky. Begin's family was wiped out in the Holocaust. He was imprisoned in a Soviet labor camp, but he escaped, and in 1943 made his way to Palestine. In the immediate post-war era, he became a leader of the Irgun, the predecessor of the IDF, focused on fighting the British, who still had sway over Palestine and who were refusing to allow Jews to enter Palestine. Pitiful sight, the survivors of the camps turned away from the port of Haifa within sight of Israel. Some people called Begin a terrorist because they claimed that he had participated in the bombing and the dynamiting of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, which had been used as a billet for British officers with over 100 dead. After Israel's statehood, Begin was a leader of the conservative movement, a perennial losing candidate for prime minister. Not for nothing was he called the Barry Goldwater of Israel. Begin was not conventionally religious, but he was probably the first Israeli prime minister to publicly profess a belief in God and to wear a kippah in public. He was not ipso facto opposed to Land for Peace. After all, as prime minister, he presided over the return of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt in return for a peace treaty and recognition. But like most Israelis at the time, he had a dim view of the Arabs coming to the bargaining table anytime soon. Although he was an Ashkenazi, he went out of his way to court the Sephardim, constantly referring to them as my brothers. Now, by itself, Likud, although it outpolled the Labor coalition, did not have 61 of 120 seats. And so he had to form a coalition government. Naturally, he moved to his allies on the right wing. And naturally, he had to make concessions to those allies. One of them was to give the Interior Ministry to the Haredim. And the Haredim immediately started moving on their agenda. One was to allow more widespread settlement in the territories occupied after the 67 war. Here, I think it's fair to point out that this was not strictly supported only by the Haredim. By that time, a lot of non-Orthodox Jews supported having more widespread settlement in the territories, partially because they gave up on the Arabs settling up, partly because for practical reasons, patrolling those territories with the IDF was bleeding the Israeli treasury. They thought if they allowed settlers, armed them and gave them some military training, the settlers would be able to make the land become productive for Israel. So there was that concession. The second was to open up the question, see the pointer there, of who is a Jew. Now the Haredim dared not move against the biblical definition. A Jew is a person born of a Jewish mother. Instead, they took aim at a small but influential group of converts to Judaism. They ruled, and the government supported them, that only conversions performed by Orthodox rabbis would be recognized for immigration and citizenship purposes. This outraged Jews in other parts of the world, particularly in America, where, as you know, a majority of synagogue Jews are affiliated with the Reform and conservative movements. Those Jews believed, with considerable justification, that the Israeli government's ruling about only Orthodox conversions, in effect, disenfranchised their converts and delegitimized their movements. And the Haredim have doubled down on that in recent years by now arrogating to themselves the right to vet the bona fides of Orthodox rabbis. So if you were a convert and you were converted by an Orthodox rabbi, not so fast. The Haredim have to rule on that. Another was to give the Haredim control over Israel's historic and religious sites, including the Kotel, or Western Wall, the last remnant of the Second Temple destroyed by the Romans circa, 70 CE. Here I have to back up a little bit. When the United Nations partitioned Palestine in 1948, they suggested to the Israeli government that Jerusalem be an internationalized city, something like Danzig was between the two world wars, to be jointly governed by Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And the Israeli government looked with favor on that ruling, on that suggestion, but the Arabs did not. And as we know, 5 Arab governments, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, declared war on the new Jewish state, vowing to throw the Jews into the sea. The IDF, the Irgun, although badly outnumbered, managed to hold off the Arab attackers at the borders of the state of Israel, but they lost ground in Jerusalem, in the old city. There, a Jordanian army led and equipped by the trained and equipped by the British, defeated the Irgun and drove out all of the Jews from the old city, some of whose families had been there continuously since biblical times. They destroyed all 63 of the synagogues in the old city, turned the oldest and holiest Jewish burial ground into a garbage dump, and refused to allow Jews to worship at the Kotel. When the IDF liberated the old city in 1967, the soldiers with their rifles still strapped to their backs made a beeline for the Kotel to worship and pray there. And now the atheists and agnostics had the pleasant experience of having another title added to them, defenders and preservers of Jews, the holiest place in Judaism. I'm sure they love that. Every year, hundreds of thousands of visitors come to the Kotel to worship, to pray, and to put little prayers to God in the chinks of the blocks remaining there. That is male worshipers. The government gave the Haredim control over the Kotel, and the Haredim ruled that Orthodox minhag would apply at the Kotel, which meant that women could not worship alongside of men, could not wear the talit, could not touch the Torah. This outraged women around the world, especially Jewish women, and became a rich source of anti-Israeli propaganda. Women attempting to worship at the Kotel have been roughly treated. They have been spat upon, abused, physically roughed up, sometimes arrested. Now, the government has since relented a bit and set aside a part of the Kotel for women worshipers. But brave women and women of the wall are still lobbying, so far unsuccessfully, for equal treatment at the wall. Now, if there's time, let's see, 16. I'll go on a little bit about the question of whether or not, contemporary here, asking whether or not Israel has too much influence over American politics. We're moving into a little different category here. This is a complex subject, which goes a little far, but in a really good book, which I read recently, Doomed to Succeed, Dennis Ross, a Jewish guy who was a longtime diplomat and government official with the National Security Agency, the State Department, and the White House staff, in Doomed to Succeed, he basically says that every administration has regarded Israel as an impediment to its objectives in the Middle East. They assume that every Arab and every Arab leader wakes up every morning more worried about Israel and Palestine than they are about such basic things as where they're going to get their next meal and whether or not they're going to survive the day's terrorist attacks. And so the US, the State Department anyway, has punished Israel to gain favor with the Arab states. And they ignored the fact that Israel achieved relations with non-belligerency with Arab neighbors. Now, how has Israel weathered that hostility? We saw last year in the Abraham Accords that Israel established relations with 4 Arab countries based on very practical stuff, self-interest, recognizing a simple fact. The Arabs stand with Israel against Iran. They see Iran as a bigger threat to Israel than they see, a bigger threat to them than they see Israel as a threat. And they also want to get together with Israel's vibrant economy and be trading with them. So how does Israel manage to survive this? Occasional injections of common sense, Arab mistakes, and strong support from the Jewish community and Congress. And let's go here a little bit on somewhat more treacherous ground here. The United States and Israel have a lot in common, but American self-interest guides our relationship with Israel. Why? Because Israel is our most important strategic ally and the only strong ally and reliable ally in the world's most dangerous region. During the Cold War, Israel was our proxy warrior. Its serial defeats of the Soviet allies stopped the Soviets from controlling Arab oil and by extension, throttling our NATO allies and hurting us. That's an old picture I took there. Please do not interpret my use of this picture as saying that I am a fan of Donald Trump's. I am not. Then there's also the question of whether or not the Jewish lobby is too powerful in America. Well, let's take a look. Lobbies are effective when people support their aims. That's the end of the day. Saudi Arabia, for example, spends $2 billion a year in America funding university chairs in Middle East studies with professors hostile to Israel. But they don't get anywhere because, let's face it, people don't like the Saudis. On the other hand, we look at American lobbying groups here. AARP, a big one, has 40 million members, a $1.2 billion annual budget, an 82% favorable rating, but only 27% of Americans are 55 and over. Well, it shows you that they have empathy with AARP and know that they're going to get old one day and think that AARP is going to fight for them. National Rifle Association, and no end of controversy, big one, 4.3 million members, a $307 million budget, and still, despite all of the mass shootings and everything else, has a 68% favorable rating. Even though 7% of American households have guns, that's a relative minority. I suspect the number is higher, but still, even the National Rifle Association, very controversial, gets public support. So it's not surprising that AIPAC, which is a tiny fraction of the size of the other two, has 100,000 members, $67 million budget, and yet 68% of Americans favor Israel versus the Palestinians, and 72% have a favorable view of Israel, even though only 1.5% of Americans are Jewish. So evidently, Israel and its perception here are doing something right in America. Why is that? Well, it gets to be pretty tough here, but it's a reality. I said I was a pragmatist. That's because, well, I used to do public relations, and a lot of people said to me, you know, Israel could use better PR. Well, I'm not going to disagree with that, obviously. But yet the Arabs and the Muslims could use more PR because we know anti-Semitism is on the rise in America, but Americans who don't like Israel or Jews like Arabs and Muslims less. So what I'm saying here is that bigotry has a part in it. Bigotry has a part in anti-Semitism, but bigotry also has a part in Americans' view of Arabs. And face it, Arabs have shot themselves in the foot more than once. Here we see in the 50s, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the leader of Egypt, was the most charismatic the most charismatic Arab leader. He was Uncle Sam's favorite son when John Foster Dulles was the prime minister of Israel. But then he fell out of favor when he jumped into bed with the Soviets, had the Soviets arm him and demand that the US build the Aswan Dam for him. He fell out. What happened with Nasser was he chose the wrong side in the Cold War, and he wound up on the losing end of it. Iran was our best friend until the Ayatollah took over. And then with the capture of all those American hostages and holding them and humiliating them for a year, let's face it, Iran and Islam as represented by the Ayatollah did not go over real well in America. Arafat, the charismatic leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, won great favor in the Middle East, but after Bill Clinton invited him to Camp David for a replay of the Camp David Accords, and he walked out on them and started arming children with bombs. He did not win any favor in America for his cause anymore. And then, of course, 9/11 and Osama bin Laden turned many Americans away from any sympathy that they might have had for the Arab cause, including the Palestinians. Well, it is a fact of life that those are influential factors in Americans' view of Israel, even if they don't particularly like Jews and Israel. So I come to my conclusion. Some of you may be saying halavai at this point. America has a great relationship with Israel, but there are still three threats to our ongoing relationship with the state of Israel. The first is younger Jews' indifference to Israel and to their own heritage. It is a sad but true fact that religious observance is declining rapidly in America, even more rapidly in Europe. But you may remember 3 or 4 years ago, the Pew Research report showed that on an identically small number of Christians and Jews, 24%, acknowledged that they were members of a church or a synagogue, and that includes Jews. And young people today do not identify with Israel as part of their heritage, and may even be in college subject to the propaganda that the anti-Israelis put up over there. This is not a good sign for the future. A second is partisan politics that divide congressional support of Israel. Here I will mention something that happened, I think it was in 2012. There you may recall a real triple header bad play in Congress and in the administration. First, the then Republican Speaker of the GOP, of the House, John Boehner, deliberately set out to divide Congress by unilaterally inviting Benjamin Netanyahu to speak to a joint session of Congress without consulting with his Democratic colleagues. This was a move designed to anger the Democrats and drive a wedge between Jews and their traditional support of the Democratic Party. Things got very ugly there. That was strike one. Strike two was Netanyahu agreeing to accept the invitation, knowing that it would divide Democrats and Republicans. He's a real bull in the china shop. And he came to America. He openly supported Mitt Romney against Obama, which was really stupid. And then made a big partisan speech in Congress denouncing the upcoming Iran deal. So he set himself squarely against the administration. That's strike two. Strike three was Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, threatening to punish Israel for Netanyahu's transgressions, which was totally ridiculous and gratuitous. It's a complete mess on both sides. I said before, I'm a pragmatist and nonpartisan. This is an example of nonpartisan screw up. And finally, the religious right. Israel is a sovereign nation. We as Americans are not Israelis. They have the right to the kind of government they want. But to the extent that the religious right exercises undue power over Israel's politics and its perception around the world, is the extent to which they can alienate Jewish communities in other parts of the world who see them as a threat. That ends my formal presentation here. Any comments, questions? I'm going to get out of the slideshow here now. Comments, questions, objections? Anybody?
Yeah, Bill.
Yes.
You mentioned the religious right. Isn't there a lot of support for Israel from the religious right? I mean, whatever their motives are, I think their motives are that Christ can't come until the Jews support them. But I thought the religious right does support Israel.
Yes, the religious right supports it. Well, I know what you're saying, Bill. Until fairly recently, a lot of the religious right thought Israel was a usurper state, and the Satmars in particular were the ones who actually called for the destruction of Israel. Yes, the religious right are very strong supporters of Israel, no question about that, within Israel. But I'm saying that their policies are out of step with most Israelis and have been damaging Israel's image in the West. Anyone else? No?
Bobby, I would just, were you, Bill, talking about the religious right, the Christian right? Was that what you were talking? Because the Christian right have always supported Israel.
Yes. No, I was talking about the, thank you for bringing up that distinction. That's very true. The evangelical Christians have been strong supporters of the state of Israel. No two ways about that. I was talking about the religious right in Israel, the Jewish religious right in Israel. Anyone else?
Do you see any changes going forward? Is it things going to be relaxed or more or about the same control of the Orthodox in Israel?
I think that the ultra-Orthodox are gaining more strength in Israel, mainly because Netanyahu has given them an ever larger voice. Now, Netanyahu is himself not an ultra-Orthodox, but he is the head of the Likud party, the conservative party, and he needs the ultra-Orthodox support to hold on to power, which he has been hanging on to by his fingernails. But in order for him to hold on to power, he has been granting them more and more say.
What do you see as the near future in Israel? I mean, I've heard that not only has the left-wing political parties crumbled, but even the moderate political parties under blue and white have now almost completely disappeared, and that the next election is going to be right-wing against right-wing. Is that your appraisal as well?
Short answer, I don't know. Last I looked, the Israeli partisanship was certainly strong. But you're right, the moderate and the left wing have weakened in favor of a general move to the right. For that matter, there's been a general move to the right in most parts of the world, not necessarily to stronger support more people within the Haredi parties, but definitely more conservative in the state of Israel. So I think there is not going to be a return to that old labor coalition in the state of Israel. But I also believe that the actual Haredim are going to continue to be a small minority. They're just going to be more influential. Anyone else?
Go ahead.
Okay, Bill, it's Diane Shapiro. I have a question about the technology issue. Because they're so strong with technology, the Israelis, do you think that is why there is, well, I guess the coalitions that are supporting Netanyahu and, that wing of the party, is that because of the growth within Israel and technology?
Well, yeah, you're raising a great point, Diane. Israel is one of the world's greatest technological leaders. There is very little in the field of medical electronics that doesn't owe its birth to Israel. And Israel has more startups than any other country in the world, except for the United States, which is about a zillion times its size. So that is a great strength of Israel in general. And I believe that and now even those Arab countries that signed on with, that agreed to establish relations with Israel, have actually said in part they want to share with Israelis technology. To your question, Diane, that helps Netanyahu, it helps the existing government. So, I mean, it's something that they can point to with pride, and then it has political clout. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Right. Also, as we know, Israel now has the highest number of people vaccinated against COVID, which I guess we probably should have expected.
Jan Sotos has her hand up.
Pardon me?
Jan Sotos, Harvey Gordon's got their hand up. Yep.
Jan, you have to unmute yourself.
Unmute.
Got it. Thank you. Given the fact of the metamorphosis of Israeli politics at the moment, what they're going through, and the fact that we're on the doorstep of changing administrations, what do you see in terms of American-Israeli relationship, and where do you think that's headed?
That's a really good question. Biden has said that he wants to get back into the Iran nuclear deal. Right. And that is certain to set him against Netanyahu and possibly a large majority of Israelis. But I expect that, and here this is going to sound partisan, but I'm hoping it's not. I expect Biden to be more pragmatic about his public stance towards Israel than was Obama. And that's because I think Biden is a long experienced politician, knows how to get along with people, a lot more experience than Obama did. Now, I'm going to try and state this as history, not as partisanship. Obama, relations on a day-to-day basis, relations with the Obama administration and Israel were excellent. On a day-to-day basis, cooperation between our military and intelligence and Israelis' military intelligence was very good. But Obama politically early on decided that Iran was going to be the next big thing in the Middle East, and that if we only placated them and appeased them, they might join the League of Well-Behaved Nations. And it turned out, in my opinion, Iran played him like a violin. And then he made a very nice, a very good gesture. Early on in his administration, he reached out to the world of Islam and made a big speech in Cairo, which I thought was the right thing to do. You can't expect to be influential with 1.3 billion people around the world if you pretend they don't exist or that they're all terrorists, which they are not. But then he followed it up by saying, demanding Israel stop building settlements, which was Don Quixote. And America has no influence over Israeli building settlements. And so, it failed, obviously. And then he had the dubious distinction of ticking off the Israelis and making the Arabs think he was just another tool of Israel. I don't expect Biden to make those mistakes. I do expect him to try to pursue the Iran deal, but I don't think that's at the top of his agenda. And I also think Biden has a very strong history of supporting Israel, and I expect him to continue with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Someone else? No?
Guess not.
Well, if there are no more questions and comments, let me thank you once again for having me as your presenter, and I hope to be able to come back and do it again. And the next time, see everybody personally, actually shake hands, give hugs, and otherwise be in a very warm environment, which is how you welcomed me the other 2 times. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bill.
Well done.
Well done.
Bravo.
Yes. Thank you, Bill. It was very
you.
well informed.
Yeah, you're so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm going to sign off now. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
I guess we're through.
I
Yeah,
guess.
I think we're done.
Okay, thanks anyone.
Have a good day, everybody.
Good lecture.
Yes, very
Thank you for
good.
helping us get, Jan, thanks for helping us get on this morning.
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate
You're
that.
wise.
Glad we were all able to do it. That's great.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, wonderful, wonderful program. Thank you.
It was really good. Have a good day, everybody.
You
So
too.
long. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
He's always such a fount of information.